Sometimes you plan a day and you think it's going to be super productive, and then you wake up and you realize you're exhausted. So instead of doing all the great things that you think you were going to do, you just slowly plow along and hope for the best. And that's okay. Hello everybody, I'm Roxy, this is Chaotic Bibliophile, and today's video is actually going to be quite short. Like the book I am going to discuss, Childhood by Tove Ditlevsen. Now this is the first installment in the Copenhagen trilogy, and it was my pick for the low-key overdue book club, which is a project that I do every month. If you want to find out more, I'm going to link, I think, November's pick, which was this one, then December's announcement, and I believe January's announcement will be up by the time this video is up, so I will link that down below as well. In any case, I chose this for Nonfiction November, which brings me to the first point, is that this is usually considered as memoir. However, in Spanish, this is packaged as autofiction or autobiographical fiction. And in this case, is perhaps more relevant than, for example, in the case of Vanessa Springora's Consent. That is clearly a memoir, and we would consider it a memoir by today's standards. She's given interviews about it. This one does feel more literary in a way that maybe leaves more room for fictionalization or disregard for whether the facts occurred in a certain way. I don't know, I'll expand upon this after giving my very brief review. As I said, it is a very short book, so there's not much to review without discussing the fine points of it. That said, I do think that because it's not a huge story with huge plot twists, it's barely 100 pages long, I think. You can definitely watch the discussion section and not be spoiled. So, what is this about? Childhood in particular is Tove Ditlevsen's account of her growing up in a working class background in Copenhagen. It is also a very patriarchal society, so it has a lot of insights about her family and patriarchal structures, of course, about class and money and lack thereof. Surprisingly, a lot of things regarding occupation and like what people's jobs are and sort of position in the city or the home. I found those very interesting. And about innocence. The prose is really nice to read, I found at least. It is simple but lyrical. It does feel like someone reminiscing. It does not, I found, take the voice of a younger person, and here is where the autofictional aspect comes in. Of course, this was written much later, and it is true that Tove, as a child, was very precocious. However, there are lots of insights that are clearly the author's, and the analysis in the way that she presents the situations are very much a grown-up perspective, which of course happens all the time in memoirs, and one would hope that the author would have grown up and shown perspective. But I feel like often this separation is blurred. So like, for example, there's a lot of, I realized that this and that, and what follows is a very expansive, very profound analysis of the situation. And it's clear that that child did not realize that at that moment. I don't know if I'm making that much sense. As I said, my brain today is a bit exhausted, but it just feels very much like an author reminiscing and embellishing. That said, I really loved the writing style. It does feel very much like a beginning of a trilogy. It does feel like the stepping stone to something else. So it does feel like it's not necessarily going to stay with me. Although as I say that, I realize I remember a lot of it, and my favorite aspect is the analysis of the loss of innocence as it sort of crystallizes. And there are many great passages about learning and studying and Tove's relationship with literature. Literature as something forbidden, but also something she gains access to and gains knowledge of the adult world. This tension and development of the childhood world and the forceful move towards the adult world. And it is interesting because she does have quite bittersweet reactions to growing up. On the one hand, she's always been a bit too precocious and too perceptive and made adults uncomfortable. And so as a kid, she didn't have all the freedom that she felt like she deserved or that she craved because of her personality. But at the same time, growing up feels very charged. The adults surrounding her are all miserable and life is terrible, so she doesn't really want to grow up. She doesn't have many options, and so that's why I think youth is going to be fascinating, because childhood definitely sets up this journey of finding her footing into youth and then adulthood. Just having found her footing as a child and sort of that passage and evolution, I just thought it was fascinating. I think I veered to the discussion section more than the review. What I'm saying is, it's a very simple memoir. I don't think it's super groundbreaking, but if you're interested, especially in childhood narratives that are not from a child narrator's perspective, I think this is a really good way to go. It's also set in a city that I don't read that often. It's both a voice that I find very recognizable, but at the same time it feels very different and showing me a different reality. So I would recommend it if you very much appreciate author literary memoirs of the old style. Then this is a really good one to pick up. Now I'm going to talk a bit about some finer points, but again, I don't consider them spoilers at all. I think if you haven't read it and then go back and read it, it won't make much of a difference because it's in the telling. It's, again, very short. It's about the experience. I really loved the relationships portrayed here, not necessarily because they were good or wholesome. The relationship to the mother, I think, was fascinating and heartbreaking, and that sort of lack of nurturing and connection. How she felt inadequate for so long, how she felt like the ugly duckling and like she wasn't talented and her siblings were, and then understanding that the adult world sort of didn't have the right to make those demands of her. That scene where she sees her mom in a whole new light and she feels disappointment and she feels like she'll never respect her again. I thought it was so heartbreaking, but also it's often the case, especially when you come from unstable homes, even if you can't really articulate why in the way that it is done here, because that's clearly a posteriori thinking. Still, there is this sense of something breaking and something transformed or shifted. You realize you can't go back to those solutions. Likewise, the tension with the father and with the books that she chose to read and how those weren't considered to be good. Ever since she was young, Tove Ditlevsen wanted to be a poet. She does talk about her poetry and writing poetry as a young girl and how it was mostly bad, but it still provided an outlet. So that's interesting. The role of literature in general and therefore of education here is very interesting because she goes to school and she has many experiences at school, but it is implied that she will become, I don't know if a governess is the correct word contextually, since this is not set in Britain, but sort of that idea. So I don't know if that will be the case and she will go on to do that, but and then the relationship with the brother, I thought was fascinating, especially when she does a bit of flash forward. And it's like, okay, eventually we were able to like reconnect and come together because neither of us is perfect. And it was all on the adults and these expectations that were put upon us to be perfect and enact these roles of perfect children. I just thought it was very fascinating that way. Yeah, I just think it is a very interesting tale. And it does call back to literary memoirs of the past, but I think it's still super relevant, especially now that we are rethinking all age categories. So I'm definitely super interested in continuing on with the series, not until next year, I know now, because I'm deep in research mode. But I would recommend this. I don't think it's perfect. There's nothing really wrong with it either. It's just sort of what it is. And if you like what it is, then it works super well. But then if you don't, it feels kind of lacking, but there is nothing that could have been done to be improved, if you see what I mean. It's sort of a throwback to older memoir, autobiographical literary writing, and I think it's really good at that, and I would recommend it if it sounds like your thing. So that was Childhood by Tove Ditlevsen. And it is time to name the translator. Tiina, Nunnally, and Michael Favala Goldman. Yep. Really important. If you joined this month, thank you so much. If you didn't get the chance to join, that's okay. This video will be up. Leave a comment whenever you get to the book, or if you've read the book previously, please also tell me your thoughts. If not, tell me, what is your favorite memoir that you've read in 2021? I am really curious. I haven't been reading many memoirs, and I don't think that will change in the foreseeable future, but I do want to get some recommendations. I always want to get more recommendations. So yeah, just leave them down below and maybe I'll be motivated to pick them up in 2022. So that's it. See you next time.